Everybody's doing well, making it to their seats. Anyway, good morning. I'm Brad Krieger. I'm Vice Chair of Government Relations for the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber and Chairman of Arvest Bank in Oklahoma City and for the state. We're pleased that you've joined us today to participate in a critical discussion regarding the recent 2018 legislative session and the upcoming June 26th primary election, which will include State Question 788 under the guise of medical marijuana, and that is an arguable thing. The Chamber achieved really considerable success on its legislative priorities during the recent session, which concluded in early May. You can find a one-page flyer on your seat that features details of those successes. We anticipated a challenging nature of the session. Keep in mind that the legislators had literally been in session for about a year and a half when you take into account the special sessions. Given the continuation of the special session from last year and the need to address the state's ongoing budget challenges, while also achieving the critical need and top chamber priority of enacting meaningful pay raises for our teachers. Despite the challenges, the legislature stepped up to the plate by passing a historic teacher pay raise and advancing other critical business priorities, such as passing 9 pieces of criminal justice reform legislation, which help our state begin to turn the tide against over-incarceration. And that is much better than building new prisons. From the historic teacher pay raise to the protection of the economic development incentives to breaking difficult logjam both on revenue and criminal justice reform, the business community fared well in our priorities. In a volatile political climate, yet there's still more work to be done. You've got to keep in mind that we're not just dealing with our state, but we're competing with any number of states, the contiguous states, etc. So we've got to be poised to be able to compete. We're pleased to have a panel of experts with us to provide insight on the legislature's accomplishments this session, which issues continue to face Oklahoma, and what they expect to hope or see later this year and next year. We'll also spend some time exploring the realities of, quote, medical marijuana on the ballot on June 26th, and why the Chamber has joined the medical community and many others to oppose State Question 788. We also have a flyer in your seat that details more information on the Chamber's position. Please enjoy your lunch, and we will regroup shortly after lunch. There are extensive bios of each of our panelists in your program, but please help me welcome, first of all, Pat McFerron, founding partner of CMA Strategies. Oklahoma State Representative Cyndi Munson, District 85. Oklahoma State Senator Adam Pugh, District 41. And Mark VanLandingham, Vice President of Government Relations for the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber. So, this is your panel. Please be seated. Mark, we'll go ahead and start with you. This year's Oklahoma experienced a historically volatile legislative session that included continuation of special sessions from 2017, 9-day teacher walkout, and the first revenue increase in 30 years. Can you please comment on how the Chamber performed on its key legislative priorities in this challenging political environment? And how does this session rank against others during your time at the Chamber?
Thanks, Brad. With regard to the session, the first thing I would tell you is that I'm glad it's over. It went forever with the two special sessions, and so there was a long period of time out at the Capitol. As far as our legislative priorities go, maybe one of the most successful years we've had in the 10 years I've been at the Chamber. You start out with two priorities from last year that we didn't get, that we were able to achieve this year. The first was teacher pay raises. The number of teachers leaving the state, it was a crisis situation, and we made that a top priority. And so the House and Senate passed and the governor signed money to fund teacher pay raises. We don't necessarily agree with the way it was funded or all components of that, but from our perspective, the teacher pay raise was so important that we're not going to quibble with the details. The outcome was good. The second thing that we didn't achieve last year but did achieve this year is criminal justice reform. You'll recall last year we had a committee chairman who bottled everything up in his committee and didn't let anything advance. He moved on to another position, and this year we were able to work with the District Attorney's Council, the State Chamber, the governor and her staff, and legislative leadership to come up with 9 bills that will decrease the projected increase in prison population by 70% over the next few years. And so that's a trend that we were really glad to play a key part in. And then you look at some of the secondary things, the hotel motel tax at the time that we were getting ready to break ground on a $200 million convention center and convention center hotel. That would have made Oklahoma City the highest occupancy tax for hotels in the country. We were able to get that component of the revenue package repealed, which was a big deal to our CVB, who tries to bring in conventions. Protected all the economic development incentives that our chamber uses. Got another one passed called the Oklahoma Quality Events Act, which is big for us, our ability to recruit events to Oklahoma City and keep our existing events. And even minor things like protecting funding for the Heartland Flyer. And so there's not really anything we set out to achieve that we didn't achieve. And so it was a long session, but at the end, we're happy with the outcome.
Okay, thank you. Senator Pugh and Representative Munson, could each of you address the highs and lows of this past session?
Want to go first? Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. The highs are I'm alive, and I don't look like Mark yet. So while aging rapidly, just kidding, Mark. And my wife is still very supportive of me. We had a baby, and I started a business, and so I just didn't have enough going on. So I said, let's go through 2 special sessions. Kidding aside, in Edmond, Oklahoma, when I was knocking doors 2.5 years ago, the consistent issue I heard on the doorstep was fix the budget and fund education. And certainly in my district, education has been the driver of our growth in our community. It's why we've been able to continue to attract young families who want to raise their kids and make Edmond home. And for my first 2 years in the legislature, I wasn't sure we were going to get that done. And we did, and that's why I think it's a really big deal. Do I think it's the finish line? Absolutely not. But I think we need to step back and recognize how important it was that we took a giant first step in the funding of education. Did I love the bill? No, I didn't, actually. But like most things in life, I felt like compromise was necessary to accomplish something. And I believe that the people in my district sent me to the Capitol to govern. And that's what I believed that vote was about. That was about governing and about leading. And so I'm very proud that the legislature, in a bipartisan fashion, despite what I at times thought impossible, we were able to get done. The low point was not any one particular time. I think we're at just a general low point in our nation right now of how we treat each other and how we talk to each other, how we engage civically. And that continues to be a source of my frustration. This is not the most important thing I have going on in my life. I'm a dad and a husband, a member of my community, my church, I volunteer, and all those things matter to me more, actually, than being a senator. It's not the best title I've ever had either. So at some point, this has an expiration date, and I won't be the senator from Edmond anymore, but I'll still be the dad and the husband, and people still see me at the grocery store, and I want them to be proud of how I acted when I was in the legislature, of how I treated them, even when we disagreed. And so I continue to work to be an example, and I hope I've been a good example at this point on how you can work through challenging issues that are complex and nuanced and not black and white with great people, regardless of what their party affiliation is, because I'm sitting next to one right now. And you can be an example of how people can work together to get stuff done when they're there for the right reasons. And so I hope that my kids and my district will continue to look at my time in the legislature as, yeah, that's someone who represents my values and represents what Edmond stands for. And I hope we can continue to make all of you proud, that even when you disagree with us, and that will be often and frequently, that you know that we're there trying to do the right thing, making hard decisions, and that you're glad that you sent us to the Capitol.
Representative Munson, you want to address that?
Sure. I also want to say thank you. Thanks for having us, and thank you for being here. I got into the parking garage right before the rain started coming down, so I feel good about my planning. So I hope you got in here before you got wet. But the last time Senator Pugh and I were actually on a panel-type session, I guess, was in front of a group of 7th graders talking to them about careers and how great our jobs are, but also how challenging they can be. And we certainly experienced that in these last few sessions in the last year and a half or so. But when I was thinking about what the highs were, for me, the walkout was a very interesting political experience to be a part of as an elected member of the legislature. But also, I don't want us to forget, especially in a time of recent news of celebrities anyway, who have lost their lives into battles of depression and suicide. There was a mental health advocacy day that happened in the midst of our 2 regular sessions that were really inspiring to me because I love hearing stories about Oklahomans, and I love hearing about the challenges that we face on a personal level, and for members of our community to see that they are members who are elected in the legislature who are listening and who can relate and who have compassion around their struggles, and give them hope that there can be change made as long as they speak up and they share their stories. And I know for many of those individuals who came during the mental health advocacy days, during the teacher walkout, not just teachers, families, students, people from all walks of life, just getting to the Capitol sometimes can be a struggle. And they don't feel like their voices are heard, and they don't feel like they have the opportunity to make a change in all of the things that we face in our state. And so for the high, for me, was having the opportunity to have genuine conversations about the challenges we face, how they impact daily lives, and how important my decisions are and what happens for the future. I also loved being able to walk through the process with a lot of teachers and students who got a real good education on how civic engagement works and why they are so important to the process, and when they're not involved, decisions are made without them included. And so that was really special to me. But the low was watching teachers break down when they felt like they really didn't make a change, and hearing the stories of teachers, regardless of the raise and the movement that happened this session, that they are leaving the state of Oklahoma or they're leaving their industry, the passion and or the profession that they're passionate about and what they love. And not getting to where we probably want to be, but I also have hope that coming together, I did have this high of also finally having a chance to vote for something and see it pass. It's like, oh, it can't happen, you know? And of course we had struggles, even within our own caucus meetings, they were not easy. And I really try and look at my job as a member of a big family trying to solve a really big crisis. And I think we are at a tipping point in Oklahoma where we can decide to keep doing what we're doing, or we can start having the hard conversations, and which is why I am so appreciative of being a member of the Minority Caucus to be on this panel to share my perspective and where I'm coming from with just a different point of view than the majority. But I do feel there is room for compromise. I think that many of us who are new to the legislature have a passion to work together. We want to be different, and that's what I'm hopeful, and I think that is what a lot of us have walked away from the Capitol from. I think it's changing the conversation on the doors. The dynamics are much different in my district, and so it was tough. I'm finally feeling a little rested, but those were the highs and lows for me.
We're not going to let you rest long, so
Yeah,
you also get the next question. As one of the House Democratic caucus members who voted yes on Step Up, can you give us what your rationale was for supporting this proposal, as well as your perspective on the outcome and any ramifications from that?
That was a really tough decision for me, and I think that a lot of times when you hear those of us who are elected who say that's a tough vote, I always wonder what that really means to each of us individually. But when you have real philosophical or personal conflict with a decision that you're going to have to vote in favor of, or feel you should vote in favor of or against, you do internalize it, and you have to remind yourself that you have to look yourself in the mirror every day after you make that vote. It's forever posted on pieces of paper in the House Journal and on the newspapers, and it's repeated back to you on the doors and in your mail pieces, so you have to live with that decision. And I struggled with it for a while because I grew up in a middle-class family that struggled financially, lower middle class, a single parent who, increasing, gasoline within your budget can be really tough, and I know what that feels like. But I came to the conclusion of voting in favor of it because, one, House District 85 unanimously came out in favor of it, even if there were issues that they felt, and they were pretty vocal about letting me know what they weren't happy with, but overall wanted to see the state move forward and have some kind of solution. Many of the members of the coalition live in House District 85, so I have a different and more unique perspective than maybe some of the members of my caucus because of the district I represent and the individuals I represent. But ultimately, when I decided to vote yes, I decided that I had two choices, and that was to live with a decision that live with voting in favor of something that I wasn't completely happy with, or working through some of those differences and seeing the state move forward in some way, and possibly fixing some of the issues that we were facing with the budget and the crisis that we've had with our fiscal issues. So I decided ultimately to vote in favor of it. I voted for all of the revenue packages because I'm an optimist and I want to be for things. I don't want to be against them. But I think the conversations we had towards the end, specifically those of us in the Democratic caucus with business leaders and those who traditionally don't engage us in conversation, were really, really important. They were really tough at times, but I think they were important and they were necessary. And I think many of the leaders of the Step Up Coalition realize that we have well-meaning, hardworking, smart, thoughtful Democrats in the legislature who want to be a part of the business conversation and be a part of the fiscal solutions. And I think that was important. And I think going forward, we all have to be involved in the conversation when these types of issues are brought up, and we have to make decisions that are critical to our state.
We know that was a tough choice, and we applaud your courage. So, Pat, can you walk us through the Coburn Initiative petition drive and the impacts that it could have on the revenue that was passed during session to fund teacher pay raises?
Yes, I'll talk about it fairly broadly here. I'm not involved in that effort in any way, shape, or form. I want to be very, very, very clear on that. We have a fairly low threshold signature. Around 40,000 signatures are all they need to gather, get those verified, and they can be on the ballot. there's some question about when that would be on the ballot, but I think that the goal for that organization is to have that on the ballot in November. And the challenge is that we'll start spending money. We actually had two different bills, as the legislators know. One that spends the money and one that raises the money. And they would only be repealing that which raises the money, but those spending obligations will still be in effect. And so passage of that would lead to, I think, pretty disastrous consequences for mental health, for corrections, for education, for other areas, for most of state government to not have that revenue in place. So I do think that's some real challenges there in that effort. Again, I don't know the status of where that is, but I do know that they are still gathering signatures. I think they have until July 18th to turn those in. My experience with signature gathering, I was involved in a recent issue gathering signatures. Our goal was to turn in 200% of what was needed in case there were any challenges or concerns. And so I think if they are, if they turn in right at that 40,000 number, I would encourage anybody opposed to it to get engaged and find a way to challenge those signatures to keep it off the ballot. I do think that it would probably have a difficult time passing because, as I think a Republican senator and a Democrat House member have mentioned, a lot of support for the teacher pay raise, and it will be tied and seen that a rejection of that would be a rejection of the teacher pay raise.
Senator Pugh, if you had to identify a structural reform to the Oklahoma State government that would make it run more efficiently, what would that reform be and why?
We don't have enough time. But this is certainly an area that a lot of us are focused on and concerned with. I would argue that the way we're structured right now is somewhat dysfunctional. Power is very dispersed, and while there's a fragment of the voting constituencies that think that's a good thing, it's very challenging for us to lead and row the boat in the same direction based on how our government is currently structured. And I can give a lot of examples. I'm going to give a couple. Last session, so my freshman year, we voted on a bill. It was a DHS bill, and one of my colleagues ran the bill, and it was a bad piece of legislation, in my opinion. And it went down in flames. The next year, the same colleague had a similar piece of legislation that came to a vote. But the legislation was tweaked a little bit, and I asked him, how is this different than the bill that you ran last year? Because you took out, there was an age discriminator in there. And he said, oh, DHS they implemented that through a rule. And so I thought to myself, wait a second, the legislature just defeated a piece of legislation like 40-7. And then DHS took it up as a rule anyway and is doing it now. And there was nothing we could do about it. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons is because the governor really has little to no control over who runs the ABCs. And that's a problem, in my opinion. And so we really just kind of nibbled at the edges of that, trying to give the governor some authority to start naming the heads of boards and agencies, et cetera. And we probably just had a modicum of success in that. Another issue for me, which was glaring, is that coming from the business sector, I've never seen it where a CEO and a COO can work in opposite directions of each other. Yet, when you elect a governor and a lieutenant governor separately, and we're one of the few states that does that, that is exactly what you are setting up at the top of our government. The two chief executives who don't have to be on the same page to do anything. They can be separate parties, same party, different ideologies, same party, different agendas. And that is really challenging when, as a conservative, people tell me, run it like a business. Well, a great place to start is at the very top. So I have a state question on the ballot in November, State Question 798, which would put the lieutenant governor and the governor as a ticket. Will it solve all of our problems in state government? Absolutely not. But in my opinion, it allows us to build a shared agenda based on a vision, and then we kind of work together on those 3 or 4 things that we think are the most important priorities of the state. And we go accomplish them, and we accomplish them together. And it doesn't mean together as just Republicans or Democrats, but together as we've rallied around these 2 or 3 things we think are great for the people of Oklahoma, and we're going to go do this. Again, I could go on and on about the budget process, which I think is broken and top-heavy, and I look forward to Mark inviting me back when we have that separate discussion for another luncheon. But I'll stop there because we could chase the rabbit far down the hole.
Thank you. Mark, from your perspective, tell us what the significance of term limits and Rule 640 to the Chamber's lobbying efforts at the state capitol.
Well, you start off with term limits, and that was changed, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, or maybe even longer than that, to where no one can serve in the House or Senate more than 12 years, or combined in the House and Senate more than 12 years. It changed a lot. If you look at the positives, I think you would say that it avoids a concentration of power in 1 or 2 places over a prolonged period of time. Every year there are people terming out of office. The committee chairmen change frequently, and so if you get stuck with a committee chairman on one of your bills that's not going to hear it or not let it move forward, in a couple of years it's likely to change, and so there is a lot more turnover at the Capitol, and in some instances I think that's good. On the downside, it's as a lobbyist, it's hard to build relationships with everyone at the Capitol and keep them. You've got 101 House members and 48 senators, and every year you're losing 30 or 40 people to term limits or other reasons, and it's just a lot harder to get to know people and build a relationship with them and trust than it used to be when there wasn't near as much turnover. And so that's always a challenge for us, getting to know the new members. There's a loss of institutional knowledge each year when people leave the Capitol and they're replaced with new people. I think you can just look at the Senate Judiciary Committee this year. You're losing lawyers Holt, Sykes, and Sparks from the Senate Judiciary Committee, and so we're down to, I don't know, 1 or 2 lawyers in the Senate, and that's going to impact how thoughtful that committee can be. And not a negative at all, but the legislature, to me, as a whole, is a lot younger.
Younger.
than
Everybody's younger than me.
No offense taken, Mark.
State question 640. For those of you who aren't familiar, that's the one that says you've got to have a 3/4 supermajority of both the House and the Senate to pass a new revenue bill. The good part of that is that it requires, it's a lot more difficult to raise taxes than it used to be, and which requires the legislature to be much more deliberate and thoughtful and intentional about how it appropriates the money, because it's really hard to raise new money. The negatives, I think, is that it has led to gridlock a lot, and the gridlock has led to special sessions because the 75% threshold in each chamber, it's higher than any other state, and it's just almost impossible to get. This year, with the legislation funding the teacher pay raise and other measures, it was the first revenue increase in the 25 years since State Question 640 was enacted, and so it can really slow things down, and the legislature, I don't think, can be as responsive to a situation as it used to be. The final point is that, for better or for worse, it has given the minority party more power, or as much power as the majority party. And you just have to look back as far as the step-up vote in the House, where supermajority of Republicans supported it, but the Democrats, only 10 House Democrats voted for it, and so it couldn't cross that finish line. But that's not all bad. Maybe the lesson is that the House Republicans need to work more with the House Democrats. Would be one side of it before putting something up for a vote. And so certainly term limits and state question 640 have had an impact on things at the Capitol.
Thank you. Representative Munson, as a legislator who represents a once traditionally Republican state house district in northwest Oklahoma City, what, if any, demographic changes have you seen that are playing a role in making areas of urban Oklahoma City more blue than red?
Sure. First, I want to comment about House District 85, and in my experience knocking doors and doing all the work I've done there since 2013 is they're very mindful and engaged voters, and probably the most engaged area of the entire state, I think. I feel like I get the most phone calls and emails, so I'm very behind if you've emailed me. We finally figured out a way forward to get back to everyone, but they're always asking me very thoughtful questions, even when I was running as a new candidate, and that really helped me to understand the importance of being mindful of how I'm addressing issues and where my beliefs are, and how do I balance that with that of my constituents and how I best represent them. But I think overall what you're seeing in Oklahoma City is that, and what I'm seeing even in my neighborhoods, is that families are getting younger and they're getting more diverse. Generally, you're seeing younger voters or those who are just tired of politics and partisan politics. They're kind of abandoning political parties that they have traditionally been registered in, not necessarily switching parties, but becoming more independent or thinking outside of the box when it comes to the issues that we're facing, especially in Oklahoma. They're less partisan, and I think younger voters and younger families who are really concerned about public education and what's happening in our local community, that's really their focus. And so they're looking for leaders who are actually doing the work to learn about the issues, regardless of their own personal belief, and honest when they don't know, and try to gain perspective from those who are experts in order to lead. I also think that they're looking for leaders who are authentic and not just using political talking points and rhetoric. I try myself not to use that because it annoys me as a millennial, as a young voter and a young leader. And in these districts, you are seeing more Democrats running who are working really hard, who are really mindful, who are smart, and have no problem with figuring out that they're wrong and trying to find the solution to the problem. And I'm really impressed by the individuals who are running, who are knocking doors. You know, we always try and tell candidates, you must knock the doors. You can't just go to events and think money's going to win your way. You have to knock the doors and get to know the individuals, because we now know that voters are motivated to vote for a candidate because they know them. Social media, I think, has changed a lot too in terms of connecting with leaders and knowing us as people and not just politicians and elected leaders. We're not so far removed from our constituents. And so that's what I'm sensing and seeing. And I think with all that has gone on recently, obviously in the last year and a half, but the past decade, of one political party being in power, that imbalance is not working for everybody. And I think that people are looking for alternative solutions and people that they can get behind and vote for. I think it's a good thing. I think imbalance of government is troublesome regardless of party. And I'm really happy that voters are going beyond just voting for the party and voting for the person.
Pat, given the historic number of candidates running for office this year, how do you think 2018 is going to play out? And will either the majority or minority gain seats?
Well, I do think that Oklahoma is undergoing a little bit of a transformation. I expect the minority party to gain a few seats, but I don't think it's any sort of tsunami. The reality is Republicans have overperformed during the years of the Obama administration. And so there are some changes. We're seeing Democrat support in the urban areas, as we just discussed, but the rural areas are becoming more and more Republican, even though 20 years ago, they were traditional Democrat areas. So I think that's changing a little bit. I will also tell you, I think that there is something to be said for the intensity of the minority party. I was involved back when the Republicans were in the minority. I'll tell you, Republicans did a better job then recruiting candidates than they do now. Democrats are out recruiting Republicans on the candidate side right now because they have that intensity, that desire where we can go and build. But even with that, I don't think we're going to see a huge amount of change. I think you might see more change in primary elections. The way the seats are drawn, the way they are, there are very few competitive, large turnout elections areas. Special elections are different. I think you make a real mistake if you try to look at the special elections of the last year and a half and say that's going to be reflected in a general election turnout. So I think the change will be rather minimal, but I think the changes that will happen will be ones that will be more sustained because it's the demographics of those seats that are changing. But make no mistake, 67% of Oklahomans still say they're a conservative. Only about 25% say they're a liberal when they turn out to vote. And we'll see what happens, but I still expect close to 40% of the people who end up voting on Election Day to be over the age of 65 because young people just have not engaged much when you look at a statewide level.
Senator Pugh, what do you believe are going to be the challenges and opportunities welcoming the substantial number of new members to the legislature after November?
Well, we already did it. 2 years ago, we're off the largest 2 freshman classes in the history of the legislature. I believe it was 31 in the House, and we're up to 15 in the Senate. So that's essentially a third of each body is brand new. And if I've done the numbers correct, by 2020, I think 87% of the legislature will be less than 4 years time in office, which is just incredible. Now that can be scary for lobbying organizations and associations, but I do welcome it as an opportunity. The most dangerous thing I think any organization could say is, that's just the way we've always done it. And when I was in the Air Force, I heard that a lot. I mean, we're talking an institution with 250 years of history, and we like to do things, and we're generally always a decade behind in the military. We're always fighting the last decade's war. And so that is a dangerous mentality, no matter what organization you're involved in. And the state government's no different. For the first time, I think you had a group of legislators, and I can only speak to the Senate, which is where my experience has been with my colleagues, that walked in that door, and they weren't there to just vote no. They weren't there to stop the boogeyman. They were actually there to lead and to govern and to legislate, which is, I think, a shift over what maybe a previous generation of legislators walking in that door felt like, especially as Republicans took control. And somewhere along the way, smaller government became no government or became anti-government. Leadership became stagnation, and let's not do anything. Let's just fight DC. And we conflate all those issues. When really, at the state level, the majority of stuff that's affecting your lives on a daily basis are stuff that we're doing at the Capitol. You're driving on the roads we fund. Your kids are walking into schools that we fund. You're protected by police and fire that we help fund and make sure they have the right resources. So when you have this new generation of leaders who actually want to do stuff and lead and not just, truthfully, not just throw the name of Jesus around like an idol, like the golden calf. They rub it and it's magical and that makes you a better legislator. Or you don't say Constitution enough in your campaign, video, and that somehow makes you a better legislator. Actually, folks who wanted to walk into that building and say, my people want me to represent them. And they've sent me there, they trust me. And I have sensed that the majority of my colleagues, they feel that they're there to do that. And that is, while I agree with Cyndi that maybe teachers walked away a little frustrated, or people walked away a little frustrated. They didn't get everything they wanted. I was actually optimistic because I felt like there was a large shift in kind of the mentality of what we were there to do. The other thing that I'm really excited about as an urban guy is we've got some urban leadership now. And I'm actually very excited about that from the Senate perspective, because the truth is most things fall along rural-urban lines. When challenging issues arise, we generally split along those lines. And I am partial to the urban-suburban maybe, I don't want to say our agenda, but I feel like we've been underrepresented at the Capitol. And I'll give you a perfect example, and then I'll end. We wanted to do some redistricting of the Supreme Court and how judges were nominated, where they could be carried from. And we wanted to align it with the congressional districts and then have 4 at-large districts. And it became a bloody battle on the floor with my rural colleagues, who I get along with, and actually the majority of my friends are rural folks in the Senate, then screaming the sky is falling because the rural folks were going to get shut out of the judicial nominating process, and everything was going to be represented by Tulsa or Oklahoma City folks. And by squawking loudly enough, my rural colleagues defeated that piece of legislation 2-1. 2-1. By claiming suburban folks were taking over the Capitol, they beat us 2-1. And so I'd like to see a more balanced shift into how we approach problem solving, that it doesn't become a rural-urban issue. It becomes a what's best for the state. And we can agree that a great, thriving metro area is just as great for the state as an alfalfa farmer, on the Kansas border, who has a great market to sell his product to, and finding that balance. And so between a new freshman class and another large freshman class incoming, and new leadership, I'm very excited about the opportunities ahead.
Pat, as campaign manager for anti-state question 788, can you share with us how the campaign's going? Who's joined the anti-state question 78 coalition, and the key messages of the campaign that are being communicated to voters?
I think that'll take about 30 minutes here. No, I think it's going very, very well. The coalition continues to grow. Oklahoma City Chamber, obviously a vibrant leader in that. We have many other business entities that are growing, that are joining. The State Chamber, the Tulsa Chamber, Edmond Chamber, South Oklahoma City Chamber. I'm sure I'm leaving some others off, but quite a few chambers. Trade associations. We have the Oklahoma Farm Bureau is our latest member to join the coalition. We have a group in the medical community that's very concerned about how this state question addresses medicine. From the State Medical Association, the Hospital Association, anesthesiologists, family practitioners, a full range in the medical community, and law enforcement, district attorneys, sheriffs, FOPs. And then we also have the faith community that has concerns. Oklahoma Faith Leaders is a group of a couple of hundred pastors from across the state that have gotten active and engaged. The Catholic Conference have all joined because they have concerns. And one of the things I want to point out, and one of the key messages here, is these groups are not against medicinal marijuana. This is not an opposition to medicinal marijuana in any way, shape, or form. The only thing that unites them is that they are opposed to State Question 788, because the reality is it's as close to recreational as you can get, if not being recreational. And some will make an argument that it's worse to have it, to elevate marijuana to this medicine status, because that makes it tougher to regulate. The campaign's going to talk about a lot of those types of issues. From an 18-year-old, when you get your, under 788, when you get your license for medical marijuana, it gives you a right for 2 years to carry it up to 3 ounces, which is enough, my understanding, for more than 200 joints. It allows you to grow it, have 6 adult plants and 6 seedling plants, which is enough for, I've been told, 12 to 20 pounds a year of growing. And again, you get 80 joints per ounce, so that's quite a bit for a person, 15,000 joints there for that. But it gives you that right to grow it, to carry it, and to use it wherever you want. I've talked to some lawyers. They say that, for example, right now, there might be some people having allergy issues or colds and want to have an asthma inhaler. I couldn't stop you from using that here. If 788 passes, I couldn't stop you from lighting up either. And I've been to some Thunder games. It's pretty stressful at the end of the games. But you couldn't stop someone from lighting up in the Chesapeake Arena because the cities are prohibited from regulating from the zoning issues on medical marijuana here. And our existing anti-smoking laws only relate to tobacco. We have challenges all the time on vaping already, but this would elevate that. So those are some of the messages talking about some of the key problems in 788 that aren't addressed. Again, it's not treated like a medicine in the bill. It would be the first medical marijuana law in the state that doesn't prescribe specific medical conditions for a doctor granting the license. And so if it were truly medical, you would have that. It's also got some things I don't think were intentional from the other side, from the people who are proponents. I don't know their full intent, but it's written so broadly that you don't have to have gone to medical school to grant the license. It says, the quotes, board certified physicians. There are 7 categories of that. There's some conflicts if veterinarians could or not, but at the very least, it's so poorly written, you'd be looking at lawsuits to try to determine what can happen. From a business perspective, and these won't be the messages that we hit much with the public because they're not as salient to them, but from a business perspective, it appears to create a special class of employee. It would be in conflict with your ability to operate a drug-free workplace. And if you're a restaurant owner or someone running a hotel, do not believe you could keep someone from lighting up in your establishment, from using their medicine. You cannot keep someone in a hotel room from lighting up in the hotel room the way this is written. Again, these are things that can be fixed, but I don't think it's worth taking the risk. Let's take advantage of the new congeniality we're hearing here and get a bill passed that's real, truly is medical, addresses those without opening up this Pandora's box of concerns that 788 brings.
Mark, to continue that perspective, what are the most severe impacts to employers and business?
Well, and Pat hit on some of these, but just to kind of repeat what he said in a couple of areas, our chamber doesn't have a position on medical marijuana. A number of our chamber members support a true medical marijuana state question. It has its benefits. But that's not what question 788 is. It's recreational disguised as medical. You start with just the sheer quantity that can be prescribed. Pat mentioned the amounts. The list of people who can prescribe it. You don't have to be a doctor. You can be a vet, a podiatrist, an optometrist. They can prescribe it. And in most states, medical marijuana laws, there's a list of conditions that it can be prescribed for. Seizures and things like that, where there has been some medical evidence to support that it can provide some relief. In this one, there's no medical conditions are necessary. You just have to articulate a medical need in order to get these vast amounts of marijuana. And so you're creating a situation where it's going to be readily available to anyone who wants it, and they can get it in very high qualities. And so that's kind of the starting point from the business perspective. And then you look at the actual language in State Question 788. Most troublesome to us and most of the business community, it says any employer may not discriminate against a person hiring or in terminating decisions or penalize a person based upon their status as a medical marijuana license holder or the results of testing positive. And there's only one exception to this. It's a very narrow, limited exception relating to companies who have contracts with the federal government. And so Pat's right, you're creating a protected class under the law of medical marijuana license holders. From an employer's perspective, probably the biggest deal is they're going to completely lose their ability to create and maintain and enforce a drug-free workplace. Employees who drive heavy machinery or work on an oil rig could no longer be disciplined for failing a drug test. Although an employer could arguably, under the state question, discipline an employee for having marijuana at work or showing up impaired, there are no restrictions on using it right before work or on lunch hour, and it's just going to be really hard to get a grip on all of this stuff. You're going to create a work environment in some sectors of the economy that is just very, very dangerous because you've lost your ability to keep drugs out. And an employee can sue an employer if there's any evidence at all of discrimination against them as a protected class of medical marijuana license holder. And so you're going to see a lot of litigation against employers who are still trying to keep people who use pot regularly from entering the workforce. Finally, workers' compensation rates, I think that you can expect to see an increase in those because marijuana would now be looked upon as a medicine. Doctors will begin prescribing that to treat various symptoms that your employees may be going through. And it won't take long. I think it's natural to expect that an employee can get insurance to pay for his or her medical marijuana just by claiming an injury. And so you're going to run into that situation. And so overall, it's just a very poorly, sloppily drafted state question that opens all sorts of boxes that don't need to be opened. And so I think the thing to do would be to defeat this state question, and if we're going to do medical marijuana, let's do it with some thought put into it.
And thank you. And we've looked at it from a bank standpoint, and it's not just us as an employer. Every company that's in our portfolio, we really have to worry about, because depending on how litigation goes, I mean, they may fall into a category where they've gone from a good company, and if in fact have a case that goes against them, may not be as fiscally sound as it was before. So not only are we looking at the bank, all the companies we end up doing, at least that's an arguable item. Pat, you've been a long-time pollster and political consultant, and in addition to state question 788, give us your perspective on some of the other state questions, and there's a number of them this year that the business community should be aware of.
There are a lot of state questions that we expect to have on the ballot in November. There is a ad valorem tax question that would give more flexibility to schools and cities to use ad valorem for operations. I think it's one that's of great interest. I think people want to pay attention to. Senator Pugh talked about the governor, lieutenant governor running as a team. There is a vision fund that would set aside some of the GPT revenues to kind of help with stabilization, as we all know we live in an economy with a roller coaster commodity prices at times. So a little bit of a different take on kind of like the rainy day fund. I think obviously you want to be very concerned if 799, which is the Coburn repeal effort, gets on the ballot to understand what happens there. Even if the reality is, I think what will happen is if that were to get repealed, you'd probably see immediate cuts to other services, but my guess is you would see an effort to tax somebody else. So you might see the taxes come back with a vengeance in the other areas on that side. Two other issues I'll mention. One that I think will be on the ballot, one that will be on the ballot is elevating victims' rights to a constitutional protection. It's called Marcy's Law, State Question 794. that I'd encourage you to get interested in. And then the one that's, I think, still in question but likely to be on is a free market message. Where Oklahoma is one of only 3 states that don't allow retailers to sell eyeglasses, traditional retailers. And State Question 793 would do that, and that would, I think most people believe it would lower the price on eyeglasses, especially and make it more convenient to get eye exams in Oklahoma. So those are the primary state questions we still have that I expect us to see this November.
Okay, thank you. In the interest of time, have some questions. Okay, and the question, and this is for the whole panel. Many people believe State Question 788 will pass. Assume that there is support for medical marijuana. Why not pass legislation that is better written to address the concerns created by 788 instead of allowing the vote to be on the issue?
I'll just do the first shot at that. This is on the ballot because they collected the signatures. And so the legislature really couldn't do anything to stop this from being on the ballot. And so we have to deal with that. I think that there has been an interest expressed in both the House and Senate, and I'll let Senator Pugh and Representative Munson talk about their own respective houses. But I do think there's a strong belief that if it does pass, that the legislature will come back into special session almost immediately to begin working on fixing some of these issues that we've talked about today. I've seen a draft of a 307-page bill that's already been written that would address a lot of these concerns. And so we're hopeful that if it does pass, that we can get some restrictions on it and more thought can be put into it. And from talking to House and Senate leadership, confident that will happen should it pass.
And if I could echo on that, the early polling on this showed that without a no campaign, this would be heading to 70% support. I think it's narrower now. I think it's probably going to be closer than that. I don't know that it's going to be defeated. Obviously, I've hoped that it is. But the more narrow that victory is, I think that's the more courage that will give our legislators to come in and fix it. If it were to pass overwhelmingly, I think it's really tough to come in and say, hey, we're going to undo the will of the people or in any way, shape, or form. But if we can raise enough questions and concerns and give them the ability to come back in and fix that, that'd be great. They would have to do it, I believe, in a special session. So I encourage you to talk to your legislators and tell them, look, if the unfortunate happens and this passes, come into special session. I think it's fine if on that message you also say, and if it fails, don't make us go collect signatures again. Do it legislatively the next legislative session as well. But talk to your legislators about it. Let them know that it's an important issue to get taken care of. But
Senator Munson?
Yeah, I think we're headed to special session. Unfortunately, I think we're all kind of mentally preparing ourselves for that. So I've been taking time as I'm out knocking doors, bringing up the issue. A few people have brought it up themselves, but I'm really interested in hearing what my constituents have to say. So far, many have been in favor of it, who I've been talking to, regardless of party and all. That's very interesting. But I've also taken time to talk to employers, public health leaders, law enforcement, so I'm trying to get a better understanding where they're coming from, doing my own personal research, and just preparing ourselves to take on the responsibility to adjust whatever we need to, and hopefully we as a legislature, I don't know how well we'll do it, but at least bring all the stakeholders for, against, to come together and help guide us in making sure that we're creating legislation and law that is beneficial to those who need medical marijuana, the decriminalization of it, and being mindful of employers and physicians and all the individuals who are working against it and would like to see different language.
Senator Pugh?
I'm going to say bring it on. Special session, why not? We don't have anything else going on. And having bills with XXX after it would be kind of fun.
Yeah.
We joke that I'm not a freshman anymore. I'm actually graduating my sophomore year since I've been through 4 sessions in my first year. So 5 would really be, it's a resume builder for me for sure. The legislature was not inclined to preempt the vote. There certainly were some discussions at the Capitol and actually some pieces of legislation that would have been, in my opinion, preemptive of a vote on 788. I used a term in a committee that, sometimes we lean so far forward we fall on our face. And so I had just personal concerns with preempting the vote, whether it passes or not. What's interesting is 2 years ago, had you asked me, would I be sitting on a panel discussing marijuana legislation or a vote of the people passing Oklahoma, I would have said, hell no. But times have changed and the paradigms have shifted. So here I sit discussing a very important and, again, nuanced issue that the state question does not do enough to detail, in my opinion anyway, the thoughtfulness and the deliberateness that we need to put into good policy. To my surprise, the majority of the legislature is actually supportive of medicinal marijuana. And there are health concerns as well as criminal justice concerns that I think we really need to think through. So regardless of what happens, I think you will see medicinal marijuana come reality at some point in the state of Oklahoma. I would prefer us use the legislative process to make sure we do that properly and everybody can have a seat at that table and voice their concerns and their opinions on that. But I would like to see us do that, and I do think it will probably be done through special session. So you're safe for now, but we will be back. So hide your wallets and everything else. But yeah, I think we'll be back in special session to address it. And if not, I know some of my colleagues are already crafting legislation to address it in the next session.
I want to thank the panel for their discussion and participation today and their advocacy on your behalf. Let's give the panelists a round of applause. For the Chamber, a key component of the Chamber's effort is to strengthen the voice of business throughout the state. It's called and we do that through the Greater Oklahoma City Political Action Committee. Our PAC is engaged in this important election this year and in years past, building relationships with pro-business candidates throughout the state, and we vet those very hard. There's no question this election cycle is an important one for the state of Oklahoma. We want to make sure that the voice of business is heard throughout the state. If you're interested in being part of that effort, there is a political action brochure available to fill out and send in. Finally, we want to invite you to the July 18th for the next Chamber Forum, which will feature discussions around the Oklahoma County Wellness Score and the overall health of the community affects healthcare costs for business and individuals, from mortality rates to healthcare access and crime statistics. Learn how the current wellness score is used as a foundation for improving health outcomes and reducing healthcare costs in Oklahoma County. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for being here, your advocacy, coming out and wanting to be a part of this discussion today, and we are certainly conscious of your time. So with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Sing me this song with a breeze.